Have you ever looked at someone and felt their sadness before they even spoke? Felt the storm in their chest while they smiled like nothing was wrong? There exists a rare kind of human on this planet, so quietly powerful, so deeply alive, that life itself trembles around them. These humans do not simply walk through existence. They absorb it. They taste emotion the way some taste wine. They hear the tremors of unspoken pain. They carry the invisible weight of every room they enter. And somewhere along the way, someone convinced them that this wasn't power, but weakness. That feeling deeply meant they must also carry deeply. That being sensitive meant being responsible for everyone else's emotional chaos. But here's the truth no one ever told you. Those who feel profoundly do not feel too much. The world feels too little. From childhood, they learn to read people like maps, memorizing the fault lines of moods, studying the tectonic shifts of anger and tenderness, learning to sense danger not by sight but by energy. They weren't born as emotional mirrors. They were forged into them. Hyper-awareness became their survival instinct. Their nervous system wired itself like a radar tower, scanning the horizon for emotional earthquakes before they struck. While other children asked, "What game will we play?" These souls asked, "Who must I be today to keep peace?" A caretaker at 8 years old, a peacekeeper at 10, an emotional medic by 12. They became fluent in silent suffering long before they learned their own voice. And then life applauded them for this slavery. "You're so kind. You're so understanding. You always know how to help." What they didn't hear was the subtext. "You are useful to us. Don't ever stop." So they didn't stop. They melted themselves to warm others. They swallowed their needs so no one else felt discomfort. They became light for everyone, yet lived in shadows themselves. But there comes a moment, always a sacred breaking point. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like an exhausted breath on a random Tuesday afternoon. Sometimes it erupts like a volcano disguised as a whisper. "I can't keep doing this." And in that instant, the world as they knew it begins to unravel. They start noticing the things they once ignored, the friend who only calls when drowning, the relative who never asks, "How are you?" only, "Can you fix me?" The lover who feeds on their softness yet never offers shelter in return. The constant ache in the chest from holding tears that never belong to them. Their body, tired of carrying borrowed sadness, starts to rebel. Anxiety that doesn't feel like anxiety, fatigue that sleep can't cure, a heaviness behind the ribs like they're dragging invisible chains. They used to believe this. Weight meant they were failing. Now they begin to suspect it means they are awakening. An awakening is not gentle. It is fire. It is a blade. It is truth arriving, uninvited, and sitting at your table, whispering, "No more pretending." At first, they resist the shift. It feels like betrayal. What if they need me? What if I'm being selfish? What if I lose them? But a deeper voice rises, the voice that has been drowned under years of self-sacrifice. What if I need me? Slowly, they stop answering every midnight crisis. Stop saying yes when their soul screams no. Stop shrinking to avoid disappointing others. And suddenly, the world reacts, not with gratitude, but with panic. You changed. You're acting different. You're not the same anymore. Of course they're not the same. They are remembering who they were before the world told them who to be. That remembrance feels dangerous, not because they are becoming cruel, but because they are becoming sovereign. A sovereign heart is not a commodity. It cannot be extracted. It cannot be manipulated into service. And that terrifies those who fed on their endless gentleness. But this new self isn't cruel. No, it is discerning. Energy once spilled like water over everyone's feet now flows with intention. Love becomes selective, not because the heart shrinks, but because it finally understands its worth. Compassion becomes conscious, not reflexive. They no longer soothe storms that others choose to create. They stop confusing self-destruction with kindness. They stop apologizing for having needs. They stop negotiating for space to exist. At first, they tremble. This unfamiliar power feels reckless, dangerous, like learning to walk again after years of crawling. Saying no feels like rebellion. Rest feels stolen. Quiet feels frightening, because the silence reveals what noise always hid. Themselves, they meet the face behind the empathy, the person beneath the caretaker, and it is overwhelming, beautiful, terrifying. Healing always is. People drift. Some leave in outrage. Some fade in silence. Some cling in desperation, trying to force them back into the familiar shape of usefulness. But nature does not apologize when it transforms. A seed does not apologize to the soil it breaks open. A star does not apologize to the darkness it ignites. And the sensitive soul, once a sponge, once an emotional well, slowly becomes a mirror. A mirror that does not absorb, but reflects truth. This transition is not linear. It is a spiral. Some days they slip into old habits, rescue, absorb, carry, and they feel it immediately. The suffocation. The body remembers the cost of abandoning itself. Muscles tighten, breath shortens, the soul whispers, not again. And they choose differently, again and again and again, until choosing themselves is no longer rebellion, but nature. Soon, things that once felt normal now feel unbearable. Fake smile, the performative yes, the emotional labor disguised as love. They begin to crave something deeper. Reciprocity, connection, not extraction. Presence, not dependence. And though they may be surrounded by fewer people, they are no longer alone, because for the first time, they have themselves. There is a charged silence around them now, a quiet intensity. They no longer rush to fill empty space with comforting words. They listen, not to rescue, but to understand. They speak, not to please, but to reveal. They love, not from hunger, but from fullness. They do not chase approval. They radiate truth. And in that truth, something ancient awakens, a calm power, fierce in its stillness. They finally realize sensitivity was never the wound. Self-abandonment was, and when they stop abandoning themselves, sensitivity becomes the gift it always was meant to be. A compass, not a prison. A lighthouse, not a lifeboat. They don't drown in the tides of others anymore. They navigate them. They feel everything, but they no longer become everything. They offer warmth without burning. They carry light without collapsing under it. And the world, confused at first, begins to sense it. The shift, the presence, the sovereignty, something rare is happening here. A tender heart learning to wield its own life force. A once silent soul reclaiming its voice. A giver who finally gives to themselves. And with every breath, they step deeper into who they always were before the world demanded their surrender. And so you begin to notice the smallest shifts inside you. Not dramatic explosions, not cinematic transformations, but quiet rearrangements of energy. Like furniture being moved in the mind at midnight. Nobody hears it, nobody sees it, but you feel it. A subtle rearranging of who you are and who you refuse to be anymore. The world thinks awakenings happen like lightning. They don't, they happen like dawn. Slowly, stubbornly, and without permission, people who once felt familiar now feel foreign. Thoughts that once ruled you now sound like echoes of someone else's voice. You don't know whether you're evolving or unraveling, and ironically, both feel identical in the beginning. But you continue because the alternative is suffocation, because the soul would rather stumble into unknown territory than rot in a known cage. You are no longer seduced by noise used to distract you, comfort you, numb you. Now, it irritates you like static over a sacred song. You start noticing the emptiness of conversations meant only to fill silence. You start recognizing people who talk because they fear stillness, and people who stay quiet because they've made peace with themselves. You start valuing presence over performance, depth over charm, truth over appearance. This is not you becoming cold. This is you becoming precise. Most people confuse boundaries with bitterness because they cannot imagine strength that isn't loud. Your silence, once mistaken for shyness, now becomes a sword. A sharp, unspoken declaration. My energy is not free. And let's be honest, the world does not applaud this version of you. The world applauds the obedient, not the awakened. Society loves a person who tries to fit in, not one who realizes they never belonged in the first place. But belonging was never the point. Resonance was. You are learning that your life is not a democracy. People don't vote on who you are. No committee exists to approve your evolution. For years you gave strangers emotional citizenship in your inner world. Now you revoke those passports one by one, not out of hatred but out of self-respect. And you begin to see people clearly. Some were not friends, they were emotional tourists, visiting only when it entertained them. Some did not love you. They loved the version of you who made them feel significant. Some did not support you. They simply didn't want you to rise without them. Awakening reveals motives. It cleans the lens, and clarity is never polite. You start speaking differently. There is weight behind your words now, like they've been forged rather than formed. You say less but mean more. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. And that's when it happens. The world gets confused. They mistake your calm for arrogance. They confuse your solitude for loneliness. They think you are withdrawing, but really you are returning. Returning to yourself. You shed identities like old skin, the achiever, the pleaser, the good child, the responsible one, the self-sacrificing warrior who never asked for help. You realize most versions of you were costumes sewn by expectations, and now you watch them fall from you like loose threads being pulled free. It is scary, yes, but fear loses its teeth when you stop feeding it attention. There is a strange freedom in not needing to be understood, in letting people think whatever makes their world make sense. You finally accept that their perception is not your prison. You no longer crave universal approval, because universal approval is just universal conformity disguised as love. And you were never born to be a copy of anyone. Not everyone will celebrate your evolution, but evolution is not a festival. It is a metamorphosis. Caterpillars don't throw parties when wings appear. Transformation is rarely applauded by those who fear their own. You start listening to your intuition more. That quiet ancient compass beneath the noise. It speaks in sensations, in subtle guidance, in gentle warnings long before logic understands. Intuition is the language of the soul, and you are finally fluent enough to hear it. It pulls you to unfamiliar paths, unfamiliar ideas, unfamiliar inner landscapes, and yet they feel strangely like home. You feel your consciousness stretching, not up, but inward, into layers you never visited, rooms inside yourself you forgot existed. There are libraries in you filled with forgotten wisdom. There are temples in you built from resilience. There are oceans of memory, constellations of identity, and entire universes of possibility waiting to be explored. The greatest frontier was never outside. It was always the inner cosmos. And then, unexpectedly, something shifts. You don't wake up fearing what happens if you fail. You fear what happens if you return to who you once were. Failure feels less frightening than stagnation. Comfort feels less safe than challenge. Suddenly, discomfort becomes a signpost. It means growth. It means movement. It means you are alive. Your mind starts craving expansion instead of distraction. Books replace gossip. Curiosity replaces judgment. Awareness replaces reaction. You realize that every emotion is a visitor, not an identity. Anger knocks, but you no longer build a home for it. Sadness arrives, but you don't confuse it with destiny. Fear whispers, but you listen without kneeling to it. You learn to feel emotions without obeying them. This is emotional sovereignty. The world teaches emotional obedience. Feel, react, collapse. Awakening teaches emotional mastery. feel, observe, choose. You start seeing life like a puzzle you were never meant to finish, only explore. You stop trying to control every outcome because control is just fear in disguise. Instead, you participate in life like a dance, sometimes leading, sometimes following, always flowing. Existence stops feeling like a battlefield and starts feeling like a laboratory. Every experience becomes data. Every setback becomes refinement. Every wound becomes a doorway. You do not seek meaning anymore. You generate it. And here's the secret most people miss. Growth isn't becoming more, it's becoming less conditioned, less reactive, less attached to roles you never chose, less dependent on validation, less afraid to be misunderstood. Your life simplifies, but your being deepens. You smile differently now, not as performance, but as recognition of yourself, of the universe moving through you, of the miracle that you survived long enough to meet the real you. There is no rush anymore, no race, no comparison. You realize everyone is climbing a mountain only they can see, and you are finally climbing yours, not because someone told you to, but because the summit whispers your name every time the wind touches your soul. You grow quieter inside, but you burn brighter. You carry storms with peace. You move through chaos like water, shaping, not breaking. You understand that strength is not hardness, it is resilience. True power is not dominance, it is self-direction. Freedom is not external, it is internal permission. And without announcing it, without waving a flag, without needing applause, you become someone rare, someone who belongs deeply to themselves. And so you walk differently now, not faster, not slower, but with an awareness that every step shapes the path. Not the other way around. Life stops being something that happens to you. It becomes something that rises to meet your intention. And while the world still spins in its familiar chaos, you move through it like a traveler who has learned to read winds instead of fearing storms. You begin seeing how often people live on autopilot, talking without thinking, reacting without reflecting, chasing without knowing what they're running toward. You once lived there too. Half awake, half alive, convinced motion was progress. But movement without direction was only noise disguised as momentum. And now you recognize the difference. There is a silence forming inside you. Not emptiness, but space. Space to choose. Space to respond instead of react. Space to feel without drowning. Space to breathe without asking permission. It feels like reclaiming oxygen in a room you didn't realize you were suffocating in. Others notice it too, though they can't explain it. They say you're calmer, more distant, more mysterious. They cannot see the inner rewiring, so they label what they cannot measure. Let them. Mystery is not loneliness, it is sovereignty. You no longer narrate your evolution for the comfort of spectators. And without intending to, you begin intimidating those who built identity on noise, urgency, and drama. They don't understand how you can be so still while the world screams. They don't realize silence is not absence. It is power. A power born from knowing that chaos outside means nothing if there is peace inside. You don't rush to correct people anymore. You don't rush to prove your worth. You don't rush at all. You've learned that urgency is often a disguise for fear, and you no longer negotiate with fear the way you once did. When panic knocks, you breathe. When doubt whispers, you observe. When the world pushes, you ground. This is not weakness. This is the discipline of someone who finally understands timing. Growth is not forced, it is allowed. Truth does not shout, it reveals. Wisdom does not chase, it chooses its moments. You begin valuing patience, not the passive kind where life slips by, but the warrior's patience, the hunter's stillness, the artist's precision. Patience not because you cannot act, but because you know when to wait. You learn that becoming is not a race, but a ripening. Suddenly, those who once drained you lose access to your energy. You stop participating in emotional negotiations you never agreed to. You stop absorbing other people's storms. You stop shrinking to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold the full size of your being. And as you rise into the shape of who you truly are, something miraculous happens. The world rearranges around your presence. You understand now that boundaries are not walls, they are doorways with selective permission. You can love someone and still refuse to self-abandon for them. You can care deeply and still walk away when peace demands it. Love used to feel like sacrifice. Now it feels like expansion. Because love that costs your soul is not love. It is dependency wearing a romantic mask. You realize that some people didn't lose you. They lost access to the version of you that tolerated less than you deserved. And there is grief in that realization, but liberation too. You finally accept that not everyone is meant to continue with you. Some were chapters, not destinies, lessons, not lifetimes. Their exit is not betrayal, it is alignment. There is a maturity growing inside you, not age, but awareness. You stop trying to save everyone because you've learned that rescuing someone who refuses to swim is not kindness, it is drowning in their place. You offer guidance, not dependency, support, not surrender, wisdom, not martyrdom. Time changes next. You stop chasing tomorrow as if salvation hides there. You begin investing in the present moment like it is sacred currency. Because the future is not where life happens, it is where imagination waits. Real life happens now. In breaths, in small decisions, in silent alignments, in simple truths. And you notice it's the little things that transform you. A thought caught before reaction. A boundary held without apology. A quiet evening where peace feels earned rather than borrowed. Evolution is not grand, it is relentless. More than anything, you stop asking for validation. Approval becomes irrelevant when you finally become the witness of your own becoming. You trust yourself in ways you never did before. Not ego trust, but soul trust. The kind born from surviving, from losing, from learning, from rebuilding with intention instead of desperation. You look back at who you were, not with shame, but with compassion. That version of you was trying, stumbling, searching. They weren't weak. They were early, and early is necessary. Without beginnings, there are no awakenings. Without breakdowns, there are no breakthroughs. Without lostness, there is no discovery. You bow to the past version of yourself, not as prisoner, but as ancestor. And in that internal gesture of gratitude, you reclaim power over your story. You stop calling your past a mistake and start calling it a foundation. You stop calling your pain a curse and start calling it initiation. Everything prepared you, not for perfection, but for presence. You begin smiling at odd times, not because life suddenly aligned, but because you did. The world might look the same, but you are not living from the same place within it. You are not surviving, you are perceiving, not running, but remembering, not seeking, but sensing. You wake and the sun feels like a companion instead of a schedule. You walk and the wind feels like language. You breathe and it doesn't feel automatic. It feels sacred. Life stops being a task and starts becoming an intimacy. And slowly you learn to trust the unfolding, to trust timing, to trust energy, to trust yourself. For the first time, you are not trying to be someone. You are allowing yourself to be. Becoming was never the goal. Remembering was. And the wildest part, the world hasn't changed at all. But you have become someone who sees it with different eyes. You no longer search for meaning in noise. You find it in presence. You no longer chase light. You realize it was always emanating from within. You are still learning, still growing, still soft, still human. But now you walk with a quiet certainty. Whatever comes, you will know how to meet it. Not because life is predictable, but because you are no longer fragile. Your strength is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is not performative. It is steady. It is rooted. It is ancient. It is the kind of strength the world forgets exists until it sees it, and then cannot look away. You are not finished. You are forming. You are not complete. You are becoming. And you do not fear the unknown anymore. You embody it, because the unknown is not darkness. It is raw possibility waiting for someone brave enough to step into it without needing to control it. And now, you are that someone. And so you stand at the edge of yourself, not afraid of the abyss, but curious about the echo. You feel the pulse of possibility humming beneath your ribs. The world hasn't shrunk or softened. Instead, you have grown large enough to hold its complexity without collapsing. You don't avoid uncertainty anymore. You breathe it like air because you've learned that the unknown is not a threat, but a doorway. You don't chase answers. You listen for them. They arrive not in lightning, but in whispers, through instinct, through synchronicities, through the quiet knowing that doesn't ask your mind for permission. You have become a student of signals, a translator of intuition. The universe no longer feels random. It feels responsive, and those around you sense the shift. Some are pulled toward it as though your presence is a compass. Others pull away, threatened by a freedom they haven't yet tasted. Understand this. Awakening creates gravity. Not everyone can tolerate that pull. Not everyone is ready to meet themselves. You do not blame them. You do not resent them. You simply recognize that every soul moves at its own rhythm, and not all songs sync in every season. Some will catch up, some never will. That is not your burden. Your journey is not an invitation for everyone. It is a revelation for those with ears tuned to evolution. You become protective of your energy in a way that once felt selfish, but now feels sacred. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop apologizing for your stillness. You stop handing yourself out in fragments just to feel accepted. You stop negotiating your worth with discount minds. You understand now. Your energy is a temple, not a marketplace. You start creating differently, speaking differently, loving differently, not from emptiness seeking to be filled, but from fullness seeking to be expressed. Relationships change, not because you demand more, but because you finally offer more truth. And truth, though it scares the unprepared, liberates those with courage. You no longer pretend not to fit in, not to be liked, not to avoid discomfort. Authenticity becomes your oxygen, and anything less suffocates. You choose people who breathe truth, who carry presence, who live visibly alive instead of socially polished. You stop feeding performative connections. You feed depth, honesty, curiosity, and an inner fire. You become impossible to impress, but easy to inspire. And slowly your life rearranges around what you honor. Your days feel intentional. Your nights feel peaceful. You think slower but understand faster. You act less but achieve more. You are drawn not to what shines but to what glows. Gold loses its allure if it lacks soul. Noise loses its seduction. When you've tasted silence, you begin valuing life on a frequency the old you couldn't perceive, and that is how you know you've crossed a threshold. No doorway can close again. You've learned to rest without guilt, to pause without fear, to feel without drowning, to detach without hardening, to dream without escaping reality, to expand without needing approval, to walk alone without feeling lonely, to be present without needing distraction. Is mastery in its most human form, not perfection, but presence. People say you've changed, and they're right. Change was never the goal. Awakening was. Change is simply the footprint of that awakening. You no longer ask, why is this happening to me? You ask, what is this shaping me into? Life stopped being an opponent. It became a sculptor. You stopped being a victim. You became a participant in your becoming. And when pain visits, because it still will, you don't break the same way. Pain no longer shatters you, it sharpens you. You know how to meet hurt without worshiping it. You know how to grieve without losing yourself. You allow life to carve you, but not claim you. Wounds do not define you. They define the places where light learned to enter. You understand now that time cannot be wasted if it was spent awakening. Every detour brought perspective. Every heartbreak broke an illusion. Every fall taught flight. Nothing was random. Everything was curriculum. And then one morning, or maybe one ordinary afternoon, you realize something profound. You no longer fear returning to who you used to be because that door has closed. You walked through it and it locked behind you. The past no longer calls to drag you back. It whispers to remind you how far you've come. Feel a quiet pride, not ego, but recognition. You didn't escape your darkness. You navigated it. You didn't silence your fears. You outgrew them. You didn't find yourself. You remembered yourself through layers of forgetting. Stillness becomes strength. Solitude becomes sanctuary. Awareness becomes armor. You do not seek power. You embody it. Not control over others, but command over yourself. Not dominance, but direction. Not superiority, but sovereignty. You hold space for life instead of trying to cage it. You feel the hum of existence inside you, the pulse of possibility, the echo of eternity, the breath of something ancient and intelligent moving through you. You realize you are not separate from life. You are life experiencing itself from the inside. And then, quietly, without fanfare, it hits you. You are not searching anymore. You are building. You are not healing anymore. You are emerging. You are not waking up. You are awake. The final conclusion requested powerful ending. You stand not as who you were, not as who others expected, but as who you always needed to meet. A soul sharpened by truth, a mind stretched by awareness, a heart softened by wisdom, a presence no longer fleeing itself. This is not the end of your journey. It is the end of forgetting. A new chapter begins now, not loud, not rushed, but inevitable. You do not walk forward hoping to become someone. You walk forward knowing you already are. Not seeking the path, but being the path. Not chasing life, but carrying life within you. Your old self was a seed. This self is a root, and what grows next will not be ordinary, because you did not rise to be seen. You rose to be real, and now the world will feel you. Not as an echo of who you were told to be, but as the undeniable presence of who you chose to become. You are no longer waking up to life. Life is waking up to you.